The Clemson Tigers may be 1-2, but this is still a very difficult test for Syracuse football.
You are Locked On Syracuse, your daily podcast on the Syracuse Orange, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome into Locked On Syracuse. I'm Jackson Holzer. Thank you for making us your first listen of every single day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team every day. We are always free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And on today's show, we get ready for Syracuse versus Clemson down in Death Valley on Saturday at noon Eastern. We'll discuss the Clemson Tigers defense and how they've been pretty solid to open the season. We'll also talk about Cade Klubnik and this Clemson offense, which has been stuck in the mud through 3 games with a few flashes here and there. And we're also going to talk about Clemson in general and how they were a team in the preseason that many considered a legitimate threat to win the national title, but are suddenly 1-2. And also Clemson, for all the dominance they've had over the past 15 plus years with Dabo Swinney, them and Syracuse play each other very weird. We'll discuss all that and more here on today's edition of Locked On Syracuse. And before we get to everything, today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. So the Clemson Tigers, heading into the 2025 season, were a preseason AP top 5 team in the nation. Many people, including myself, expected that Clemson would be a legitimate threat to win the national title this season. And so far in 2025, that has not really been the case, because Clemson, now at 1-2, following a loss at the buzzer to Georgia Tech, they're not officially dead yet. There's still time for them to recover. But they are currently outside the AP top 25. And for the rest of 2025, they are quite literally playing for their season. If Clemson loses one more time, especially if that's an ACC game they lose, this team is not going to make the playoff. For a team that had national championship hype heading into the year to all of a sudden not make the playoff, that's a failure if they do not make it in 2025. And I know a lot of people are writing the Clemson Tigers off. Clemson's dead. They're not the same. You got people calling for Dabo Swinney's job. I think that's ridiculous. And the AP dropped them out of the top 25. That's right. They are not a top 25 team in America, according to the Associated Press. But let's be honest about Clemson for a moment here. Despite some of their struggles, it is still within the realm of possibility that this team does not lose another game in the regular season, that they quite literally win 9 consecutive games. And who knows if that'll be enough to get to the ACC title. We'll still have to see what happens with Miami and Georgia Tech and some of the other teams, and Florida State as well. But as far as a Clemson perspective, I still think it's within the realm of possibility they can win 9 consecutive games and keep their year alive for postseason play. Because until the Wicked Witch is dead, which is Clemson in the ACC, I am not going to bury this team. Although it would be nice if the Clemson Tigers and Dabo Swinney can remember the favor that Syracuse did at the end of 2024. Remember that? Syracuse fans, I mean, we know from our perspective, that was beating the Miami Hurricanes. But by beating the Miami Hurricanes in the final game of the regular season, that allowed Clemson to go to the ACC championship, beat SMU, and go to the college football playoff. Had Syracuse not beaten Miami, Clemson, not only do they not go to the ACC title game, they would not have been selected for an at-large bid for the college football playoff. They were dead, but Syracuse helped them out. So, hey, Clemson, remember that favor that Syracuse did? You're allowed to return the favor and let us have this one. Just saying, all right? All right, so who's Clemson? Well, do the Clemson Tigers really need that much of an introduction? This is a team that's been the class of the ACC pretty much since Dabo Swinney took over as Clemson Tigers head coach, which, by the way, this is his 18th season with Clemson. 18th. Since 2011, Clemson has won 10 or more games in a season, with the lone exception being a 9-win year in 2023. 9 wins. What a brutal year for Clemson that season. Absolutely terrible in 2023, right? Obviously, I'm being sarcastic. And we, of course, know that Clemson has played for the national title multiple times. They've won a couple of national championships, and they've been in the college football playoff and, of course, won ACC titles with Dabo Swinney. But there's a reason why there's panic in Clemson land right now, because being 1-2 and outside the top 25 after 3 games is not exactly normal for them. Yes, I know they've had rough patches over the past few years at times, but I don't know if it's ever been like this. Maybe you can argue 2023. But like this type of panic, oh boy, for Clemson, right? So what's gone wrong? Well, head coach Fran Brown of Syracuse, he said it pretty much in the press conference how Clemson, despite their record being 1-2, are just a couple of plays away from being 3-0. And he's not wrong with that assessment. They opened the season versus LSU at home. LSU, I think we all consider a pretty good team. They lost 17-10, but they had the ball deep in LSU territory at the end of the fourth quarter. But it was a turnover on downs that ended that one. Then they looked awful versus Troy for a half, but they were able to bounce back and turn it on in the second half and win that game. And then last week, Clemson went on the road to Georgia Tech, played a close game. They lost at the buzzer with a 55-yard field goal, a very, very difficult field goal. If that doesn't go in, who knows what happens in overtime, right? Maybe Clemson goes on to win that game, right? It's kind of like how in the Tennessee-Georgia game, how Tennessee was a kick away from beating Georgia. Their kicker missed it, and then in overtime, Georgia wins. That could have happened with Clemson had Georgia Tech not made that field goal, but shout out to that Georgia Tech kicker for making a 55-yarder at the end. And has Clemson been flawed through 3 games? Sure, they are definitely not a perfect team, and we'll get to their main issue in the next segment. Cade Klubnik is really the biggest issue right now with them. But another big issue is just their ability or lack thereof right now to finish games. They were right there with LSU, but they lost in the end. They were right there with Georgia Tech, but they lost in the end. They could not get the stop or force them out of field goal range at the end of that game, which 55-yard field goal is towards the end of field goal range, but still couldn't force them back enough. They also have a very weird history with Syracuse, or I really should say Syracuse has a very weird history versus Clemson, because while Clemson this entire time has been really good over the past 18 years with Dabo Swinney, I think we all know Syracuse fans, Syracuse has not been very good over the past 18 years, and that's not head coach Fran Brown's fault. He just got here, right? He got here in 2024. That was his first season. So I'm not going to hold the sins of the past of Syracuse towards Fran Brown. That's not his fault, right? Yet Clemson and Syracuse play each other very close. And it doesn't really matter if Syracuse is a good team or a bad team. Of course, we all remember 2017 when Syracuse actually upset Clemson. But then there's also 2018 where actually Syracuse was good that year, but they had a narrow loss to the Clemson Tigers. Then in 2019, Syracuse got blown out. But fast forward to 2020, Syracuse won 1 game in 2020. We don't really need to relive that year, but they won 1 game in 2020. Clemson was really good that year. They had Trevor Lawrence, think ETN was still on the team too. Great team. Yeah, the 1-win Syracuse Orange were within a touchdown late in the third quarter in Death Valley. That was in 2020. Then in 2021, when Syracuse missed a bowl, one of their closest losses that season was a 17-14 loss to Clemson. And 2022, I don't really want to talk about this as a Syracuse fan because there's one particular play that really screwed up that game. So let's just say it was a heartbreaking loss for Syracuse in 2022. And that Syracuse team was not as good as the Clemson Tigers. So even though Syracuse over on FanDuel right now, you can check the odds. They are 17.5-point favorites at the time, or not favorites, 17.5-point underdogs at the time of this recording. I don't think that Dabo Swinney is going to look at that line and say, all right, we're going to beat Syracuse just by getting on the field and putting on pads. Because for whatever reason, even though Fran Brown wasn't the Syracuse head coach during all these times, the Orange have hung with the Clemson Tigers, even if they've only really pulled off the upset one time, which was in 2017. So Syracuse fans, what do you think of Clemson? Do you give Syracuse a chance? Comment your thoughts in the comment section below. Now, coming up, we talked about already that one of the big problems of Clemson is their inability to close out games. The other big problem is their quarterback, Cade Klubnik. And make no mistake, he pretty much is the problem with Clemson right now. And we're going to talk about that next on Locked On Syracuse. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the daily fantasy app where making the right call can actually pay off. You and I make decisions every single day, but on Prize Picks, being right means actually cashing in. With football back, Prize Picks is the simplest and fastest way to get in on the action. Just pick more or less on 2 to 6 player projections, and you can turn your takes into real prizes all in less than 60 seconds. And the best part, even if one of your picks on Prize Picks misses, well, Prize Picks invented the flex play, so you can still double your money. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONCollege to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONCollege for $50 in lineups after you play your first $5. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. The Clemson Tigers offense has been a big issue through 3 games. Huge issue. Let's dive into the numbers, okay? Scoring, 19 points per game. Not very good. Only ahead of Virginia Tech and Stanford in the ACC. Total yards per game, 319 yards a game. That is only ahead of Stanford and North Carolina in the ACC. That's not very good either. They are also bottom 5 in rushing offense and in passing offense. And you can look at those numbers and say, well, Jackson, have you seen Clemson's competition? They had to play LSU in week 1. They also had to play a good Georgia Tech team in week 3. And I acknowledge that some of this is due to their opponents being really good, where if Clemson just got to, beat up on some group of 5 schools, they would have been fine on offense. Oh, wait, they did play a group of 5 school. That's Troy, and they did not play well on offense in that game. They did turn it on in the second half to avoid an embarrassing loss, but they were not good in that game. So their offense has been quiet through 3 games. Why have the Clemson Tigers on offense been poor? What's going on with them? Let's be honest. Okay? I think Clemson fans can acknowledge this as well. It's Cade Klubnik's fault. He's the quarterback. And I know it's taboo to kind of say that, right? It's always got to be something else. Or it can't just be all on the quarterback. It's mostly on Cade Klubnik. And I'm not going to sit here as a Syracuse fan and Syracuse alum and say, well, Cade Klubnik's going to stink for the rest of the year. Cade Klubnik is going to be throwing gifts to Syracuse on Saturday all day long. We all know, based on last year and his prior pedigree, that he is very capable of turning his season around. And against this Syracuse secondary and the lack of the Syracuse pass rush, really, which is the concern, if Cade Klubnik goes out on Saturday and throws for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns, would any of us actually be surprised? No. Have you seen the Syracuse defense? But Cade Klubnik is really the big issue with this Clemson Tigers offense. In 2024, Klubnik was one of the best quarterbacks in the nation. 63% completion percentage, which is not great, but also not bad. 3,600 yards, 36 touchdowns to 6 interceptions. That is a 6-to-1 touchdown to interception ratio. That is elite. There is a reason why he had Heisman hype heading into the season. If you told anyone really in college football that the winner of the 2025 Heisman Trophy would be Cade Klubnik from Clemson, nobody would have been surprised. Nobody. This was someone going into the year that many thought he could be a first-round NFL draft pick. I'm a New York Jets fan. I'm sitting here saying maybe Cade Klubnik is the answer for the New York Jets. Maybe. It's wishful thinking because no matter what the Jets do, they can get Patrick Mahomes, they can get Josh Allen, they can get anyone, and they're still going to be terrible. But, you never know. I mean, stranger things have happened where teams go from really bad to really good, right? So I'm looking at Cade Klubnik saying maybe he's a fit for the New York Jets. Right now, he actually might be a fit for the New York Jets, but it's not in the way you think. It's because he's just not been very good this season. Let's go over some of the common excuses for poor quarterback play and how they really do not apply to Cade Klubnik's struggles right now, which, by the way, here are his numbers this season. 59% completion percentage, 633 yards, 3 touchdowns, 3 picks. That's clear regression right there. This is my personal favorite excuse. Offensive line sucks. Because we'll always say the offensive line's bad, and then you actually look at the numbers, and the offensive line is not bad at all. It's just that offensive lines aren't perfect. Well, Clemson this season has allowed just 3 sacks, and they allowed no sacks versus Georgia Tech. Did Cade Klubnik look very good against Georgia Tech? Not really. He was upright. So the offensive line for Clemson, they're fine. The play calling. Garrett Riley has been Clemson's offensive coordinator and quarterbacks coach since January of 2023. So he was the same offensive coordinator and same quarterbacks coach for Cade Klubnik last year when, he was really good. Now, imagine as Syracuse fans, if Kyle McCord was allowed to come back for another year. So he was the quarterback of Syracuse for 2025. And Jeff Nixon is still the offensive coordinator of Syracuse in 2025, which he actually is. And Kyle McCord was struggling through 3 games. Is it really Jeff Nixon's fault if he's calling the same offense as he was the previous year? Or he's the same play caller? Or is Kyle McCord just struggling? It's the same play caller. Now, it doesn't mean that Garrett Riley, their offensive coordinator, doesn't deserve, I guess, some blame for what's going on right now. But the problem still lies with Cade Klubnik. He was great last year with him. Now all of a sudden he's not very good. What's the problem? Lack of run game is another common excuse for quarterback play being poor. Clemson did not do the best job replacing Phil Maffa. They didn't. But Adam Randall's been pretty good the past couple of weeks. Against Troy, he had 21 carries for 112 yards. And then last week versus Georgia Tech, 15 carries for 80 yards. I'm sorry, you don't have Travis Etienne back there. You still got talent on Clemson, right? Another one, lack of weapons. This one is sort of legitimate when it comes to Cade Klubnik because no Antonio Williams is a big loss. And we'll see if Antonio Williams will play on Saturday versus Syracuse. For those that don't know, hurt his hamstring in the first quarter versus LSU. And look, I'm not a Division I athlete, and I'm not a football player either, but I did grow up playing sports. And I once had a hamstring injury, and I can assure you that that hamstring injury is very, very annoying to deal with. Anyone that's played sports who has suffered a hamstring injury knows that that injury just lingers. It does not go away for a long time. And sometimes you can come back, and then all of a sudden it tightens up on you immediately, and you're out another few weeks. So we'll see what the status is for Antonio Williams, if he's available on Saturday or not. But that's an injury that can definitely linger. And not having him in the lineup the past couple of games has definitely hurt Cade Klubnik and this Clemson offense. But I'm sorry to Mr. Cade Klubnik and the Clemson offense. I'm not going to sit here and cry over it. You're at Clemson. You're filled with talent across the board anyway. Bryant Westrow is still a really good player. TJ Moore is a 2024 five-star wide receiver. You can't use him. How about Tyler Brown, who was pretty good as a true freshman in 2023? There's still not enough for Cade Klubnik. And here's a bonus one for you. It's the ref's fault. It's always got to be the ref's fault. You just got to throw them in there, right? Figured, right? The point being is that Cade Klubnik deserves the majority of the blame for not just Clemson's offense not doing well, but also the fact that Clemson is currently in the position that they're in, which is that they pretty much cannot lose another game for the rest of the regular season. And then once you get past the regular season, you can't lose a postseason game or else your season's probably over. It's Cade Klubnik's fault. We can also acknowledge that this is just a rough patch for him. We talked about it at the very beginning of this segment, how if he goes out against Syracuse and has a big day, he might. He might do that. He's capable of it. He is. But through 3 games, he's definitely in a rough patch right now. So he's either going to turn it around starting on Saturday against Syracuse, or he's not the guy that we thought he was. And that Clemson, they'll probably still beat Syracuse if Cade Klubnik is off, if we're being honest. They can still run the football. They're still really good in the trenches. It's going to be tough for Syracuse to move the ball against that Clemson defense. But Cade Klubnik, if he continues performing the way he's performing, they're not going anywhere this season. He has got to be a lot better. Comment your thoughts in the comments section below. Is Cade Klubnik the reason why Clemson is 1-2? I love your thoughts in the comments section below. Now, coming up, the defense for Clemson, while not perfect, has been very good this season anyway. So stick with me here on Locked On Syracuse. College football is back, and I couldn't be more excited about it, right? The tailgates are amazing, rivalries, the energy in the stands. There's just nothing like college football. But let's be real for a moment. Actually getting tickets to see these college football games can feel like more of a battle than the game itself. Endless queues, hidden fees, prices jumping at checkout. That's why I use Game Time, the app that gives the advantage back to fans. It's the easiest way to store last-minute tickets at the best prices with no surprise fees. What you see is what you're going to pay. And honestly, Game Time, it's faster, cheaper, and less stressful than any other way I've bought tickets. So take the guesswork out of buying college football tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's promo code LOCKEDONCollege, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Download Game Time today. The Clemson Tigers defense is going to still be a big challenge for this Syracuse offense. The Syracuse offense through 3 games that looks a lot like the offense we saw last year for Syracuse, which is a very, very good thing. We talked about it on yesterday's show. Clemson's defense, despite their poor record at 1-2, I think they've kind of held up their end of the bargain. Here are their numbers, okay? Scoring 19 points allowed per game through 3 games. If I would have told you, any college football fan out there, that Clemson through 3 games they would allow 17 points to LSU and 24 to Georgia Tech. What would you say their record was? You'd probably say 2-0. Or at minimum, they'd go 1-1. And this is why most, if not all, of the blame goes on the offense, particularly with their quarterback in Cade Klubnik. As far as the rushing is concerned, 111 rush yards allowed a game. Well, they held Georgia Tech to under 150, and most of those rushing yards were from their quarterback in Haynes King. Spoiler alert, Syracuse fans. Steve Angeli, while I like him so far to start the season, he's not as mobile as a guy like Haynes King. Can a guy like Yassine Willis, who may or may not play on Saturday, or Will Nixon or any other Syracuse running back find any running room versus Clemson? Well, Jamal Haynes of Georgia Tech couldn't. So I guess we'll find out. Passing-wise, under 230 pass yards allowed per game, which is honestly at this point not particularly great, but that's when you have to factor in the competition that they have played. They held Garrett Nussmeier relatively in check, although he's been kind of off to start the season too. And Haynes King, I mean, he did well, but I think most of his damage was done with his legs, which is really how he is regardless. I mean, he can throw. He's pretty good at throwing, but most of most of Haynes King's damage comes with his legs, not with his arms. So the secondary's fine too. But there are still some issues with this Clemson defense. Edge rusher TJ Parker. How about him, right? Projected first-round NFL draft pick heading into this season. 11 sacks in 2024. Second team All-American. Well, this year, Parker's got 1 sack in 3 games. And by the way, that 1 sack is his only tackle for loss. That's not remotely good enough from a guy who was supposed to be a first-round NFL draft pick come next April. It's not good enough. Another concern is defensive tackle Peter Woods, projected first-round NFL draft pick this season. He's never been a big sack guy, but Peter Woods has 1 tackle for loss to start the year. 1 tackle for loss in 3 games. And by the way, that TFL came against LSU. So for the past 2 games, Peter Woods does not have a single tackle for loss. That is not remotely good enough either. In fact, really, before the season, you could easily have made an argument that the best 3 players on the Clemson Tigers were Cade Klubnik, TJ Parker, and Peter Woods. None of those 3 guys have performed to their preseason expectations, which, by the way, were well-deserved. All were very, very good in 2024. I don't know why they haven't been as good through 3 games, but that's been the reality. Now, spoiler alert, Syracuse fans, that means that they're all going to go off against Syracuse. This Syracuse offensive line against those guys, we'll talk about that in a future podcast when we go over the matchups in this game. What's good about the Clemson defense is that they're keeping teams relatively off the scoreboard. They're holding the points down. It has not been terrible. 19 points allowed per game. 17 to LSU, 24 to Georgia Tech. They've also forced 5 turnovers in 3 games, and Purdue transfer Will Helt has been as good as advertised. He's been great for Clemson. The reality is, with Clemson's defense, while it hasn't been perfect, their issues are magnified because their offense cannot bail them out right now. I'm sorry. It goes back to what I said at the very top of the segment. if you would have told any college football fan out there in the preseason that Clemson was going to hold LSU to 17 and Georgia Tech to 24, you would have probably thought Clemson would be 2-0 in those games. And of course, they're going to beat Troy, so 3-0 to start the year. They're well on their way to contending for a national championship. But instead, they lost to LSU 17-10, and they lost to Georgia Tech 24-21. Their offense has not been able to bail out their defense when their defense has occasionally made a mistake because, yeah, they got great players, but guess what? They've been going up against other great players this season. And sometimes they're going to make mistakes. So that's how you arrive at where Clemson is at right now. They're not dead. The nail is not in the coffin just yet because they could theoretically run the table from here on out, and that is still a realistic possibility, albeit a pretty remote realistic possibility. But is Syracuse, if they manage to pull off this upset, which I'm, of course, rooting for, they're done. They're done. It's over. And who knows what the future is going to be of their head coach in Dabo Swinney. So I'll leave off with this, ladies and gentlemen. Who do you think is going to win this game? Do you have Syracuse winning in an upset? Or do you think Clemson gets back on track, they beat Syracuse, and they go on to have a great regular season? And who knows, maybe they do contend for an ACC title like we all thought they would. Maybe they do get themselves back in the national title conversation. Comment your thoughts in the comment section below. Now, as far as what's coming up on Locked On Syracuse here in the near future, we're still working on setting up a crossover podcast with the host of Locked On Clemson Tigers, Morgan Thomas. Another planned podcast I have for you all, matchup keys for Syracuse football. How can Syracuse possibly pull off an upset? All that and more coming up on Locked On Syracuse in the near future. It's another big moment here on Locked On. College football fans, Locked On and Fire TV present College Football Kickoff, your ultimate college football weekly preview. Drake Toll of Locked On Big 12 leads the conversation alongside two-time AP Coach of the Year Gary Patterson, former college star Jesse Holley, and Locked On's local experts. A college football preview only Locked On can do. Catch College Football Kickoff every Thursday throughout the season only on Fire TV. Folks, thank you all so much for watching. Thank you all so much for listening. If you like this podcast, be sure to hit the like button. If you really enjoy the podcast, be sure to hit subscribe and tell all your friends about Locked On Syracuse, and I'll see you all again soon.